There's a few words that in we're still in the sort of the preliminaries of Dr. Jung's work in this group. And so the three words that are very difficult. One is soul, one is spirit, and one is self. And I think that during his lifetime, Dr. Jung probably used some of them kind of interchangeably. I haven't, if anybody has any other wisdom on this, please let me know, because I've had a lot of trouble understanding what he meant by these things. And so I've given you 6 pages of Esther Harding's book. Um, that's a start. And so let me just give you my perspective on these three words. And mind you, these are not final perspectives, they're just my thought about where I think his oeuvre went with these things. And I'm open for discussion about it. Okay, so soul, he talks about anima as his soul. And so for a woman, it would be animus. In the Red Book, he says, "Oh, my soul," and he's referring to his anima. And he's referring also to Salome in the context of the Red Book. And so Harding in this section is talking about love at first sight, and how either man or woman, you see some individual of the opposite sex, and that individual just just accepts the projection that your soul puts out on that person, and they're the one, and you assume that you know them, and so on, and so that's what creates everything up through the honeymoon period. And then you find out that this person isn't really quite that, right? And so a marriage is about learning how to deal with the parts that aren't your soul. So soul, I think soul is also about painting and about creativity and that sort of thing. For me, I find making an omelet very soulful. I don't know why, okay, but about 2 years ago, I told my wife I would make her an omelet in the morning. And I don't know, there was just something about it that made me feel whole, just the doing of it. And I can't really describe it, but it's like, if you're an artist, you must paint. And so ever since then, almost every morning, except when it's too hot to cook, I make an omelet for my wife. And I feel it's a very soulful thing that I'm doing when I do that. But it's also, if you saw the movie Frida, at one point Frida is asking Diego Rivera, who became her husband, I want to be an artist. And Rivera says to her, if you are an artist, you will just be an artist. You will paint and you will do nothing else. And if you're not an artist, then you won't. And so that's the way it is. That's the creativity of that person. And so I felt it when I wrote my novel. I felt it when I started to paint. I felt it when I started to do my website, and the website is a very soulful activity for me. But also my wife is, she carries my anima to a large degree, and so being with her, spending time with her is important to me. And so she's got her own life. She's very busy, but I make certain that every day I drive her to work and back, because that's my hour. That's half hour to her work and half hour bringing her home is my hour when she's mostly focusing on me. I mean, she also has a mother that's still living, so her mother, she calls her mother during that half hour also. but for me, her, by a transference, her mother is my mother now. And so my mother died in 2009, and now, she's my mother, in effect. I mean, not my physical mother, but my psychological mother, in a sense. And so anyway, that's soul and what I think about it. I also think it's what Joseph Campbell was talking about when he referred to follow your bliss. Okay, follow your bliss. He was one of the famous quotes from Joseph Campbell, and and so if you find something that you're doing blissful, then you could think of that as soulful in the context of what I think Dr. Jung's talking about. Anybody, any other comments? Sounds good, huh?
I could comment.
Please.
Let you get through spirit if you wanted.
Pardon?
I was going to let you go on to spirit if you like.
Okay, well,
Because I was going to try to combine the two together.
Okay, well, let's talk about spirit. There's two kinds of spirit. The spirit that's in this page, I think, is referring to spirit of the age, and it's spirit of the collective unconscious. And as Harding puts it, the two world spirits, which Greek philosophy called the growing and the burning, okay, where you grow wheat and then you burn the field for the next year to leave fertilizer for the next year, and so it kind of describes what's going on in our election this year. If you read these two pages, beginning in the middle of this sentence at the top, right down to the bottom, you have a sort of a Finnegan's Wake discussion about what's going on in our election this year, which is a spirit of the age type thing. And then there's what is meant by spirit in the Lucy context. And so, how many have seen the movie? Okay, most of you have seen the movie. Okay. Well, Lucy, well, first of all, Jesus Christ said, and so we'll look at the first page here, except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. That which is born of the flesh is flesh, that which is born of the spirit is spirit. And so this is the quote from whence the fundamentalists take the born again, what do we call it? Motto, I guess it is. I'm not sure that the fundamentalists understand it the way I understand it, which is that, when you're dead, you don't know you're dead. It's only difficult for your family. When you're stupid, it works the same way. Right. So the point is that we, like all animals, when we die, we're dead. Okay, and I mean, I certainly hope that my parents didn't know what was happening to them when I cremated their bodies. I guess I won't know, and then when it's my turn, I'll find out. I can imagine having a few dreams about that before my death, but anyway, the point is that the spirit can and does live on, and good examples of that are Jesus Christ, Gautama Buddha, and Muhammad, peace be upon him, among many others. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, his spirit is with us, and the Gulag Archipelago, whether we read it or not, we all know something about it. Obviously, the spirit of Carl Jung is in this room because we're all here talking about him. And also, by the way, there's Buddha, actually, yeah, I guess it's Buddha. I'm not too sure. Yeah, I suppose that must be Buddha there. Sometimes it's Padmasambhava. So his spirit is in this room and made this room available to us. And so in Lucy becomes aware of this fact very rapidly. Her consciousness is going from 10%, which we all use, the 10% capacity of our brain, up to 100% in a 24-hour period. And so the movie is sort of clocking as she increases her knowledge, her consciousness of things. And when she gets to about 40%, she calls her mother on the telephone and says, "I can feel everything." And so she engages with Morgan Freeman, who is a professor who knows something about consciousness, so that she knows at the beginning of the movie that within 24 hours she will die. And she wants someone to be able to understand what's happened to her. And so, lots of nasty things happen to her through this 24-hour period. But at the end of it, she conveys the information to Morgan Freeman, and someone asks, "Well, where is she?" And on everybody's cell phone comes up the words, "I am everywhere." Okay, and so that's what spirit is. And so if you want to live on in the spirit, it's probably a good idea to think of it in that way and think about how you will leave behind your spirit for others. And all of us affect, whether we're rich or poor, whether we live in the United States or Africa, somehow we affect things. It's the butterfly in Beijing causing the typhoon or the hurricane in the Atlantic. So the spirit goes on, and the spirit that we are carrying with us came from our parents, from our grandparents, and from all of our ancestors. I mean, this weekend, years ago, I gave my daughters a loose leaf book, which I called the Daddy Book. And in this Daddy Book, I put my own memory of their birth, okay, in each individual case, but I also put a lineage of our family back to 1588 and an article about our first ancestor in North America who came to New Amsterdam in 1625 and who's written up in the Journal of Long Island History. Now, somehow over the 20 years since I did that, or 30 years since I did that, I misplaced my own. So this past weekend, I got my number 3 daughter to go to her real estate agency and scan copies of what I had given her so that I would have it again. But the spirit of that first ancestor is definitely still with us. And it's interesting. The interesting thing about this article is that, okay, there was Peter Minuet and Peter Stuyvesant and all these people, but there were also illiterate people who only show up by making their mark. And this ancestor was one of those, but he's very well known because he was the founder of Manhattan, Brooklyn, Albany, and Rensselaer, okay, 4 New York cities. And his family was 5 of the first 200 European settlers of Manhattan. And so they were literally among the group that bought Manhattan for $24. They moved out too early. Let's put it that way. But in any case, his name was Wilfrid Gerritsen von Coenhofen, and his spirit is with us here tonight. And so that's, to me, that's what spirit is in the context of what Jung is talking about, and also in the context of the spirit of the age. That's just millions of individuals all glommed together causes a spirit of the age, which the Greeks then called either the burning or the growing. And so we can see that burning or growing in every society through history, and today in various countries we can see whether they're growing or burning. And then so do you want to come now or wait until I've done self too?
Well, I'll just say something.
Yeah.
As far as self goes, I saw what she wrote. She had cited, I think his name's Muller, in the Upanishads.
Mm-hmm.
And I did do research on that stuff years and years, I think 45 years, I don't know. 40 years
You
ago.
did what on it?
Research on it.
Uh-huh.
And the easiest way I can think of it right now is Dylan Thomas wrote, "The force that through the green fuse drives the flower." Okay? So here's a force that comes through and drives this flower. And if at some point there's an interface between the flower and that force, and that's what I think of as the self. It's not, consciousness is a subset of all that.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's sort of like, what are you genetically given?
Right.
Sort of. And so, and that also, I also noticed in one of the readings you gave last week, it said spirit or mind. So spirit, it seems to be associated with Jung, with mind, or with cognition, or something that has to do, I think of as the top, where soul has to do with sort of the bottom, the body, you know, the bottom part.
Right.
And it's sort of, you've got these two, almost in a sense, I would call them fates. You know, one, you're sort of giving this, you're given this conscious, the words aren't coming. But anyway, you're sort of born with this genetic given, and both of them are sort of genetically given if you want to get physical and physiological. And each one is stamped in a certain way that, and so when that force comes up through the soul, which is the way I see it, and you express it through spirit, it sort of fits in with what you were saying.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Fundamentally, I agree with you. Okay, my interpretation of self here is it is the combination of both the conscious and the unconscious, and which is more or less what you're saying, I think.
Well, I sort of see that as like it's sort of nestled in there, because it's like at some point it's there's this memory and representation, and that sort of floats in there. And somehow, I don't want to get all into that, but there's the conscious and the unconscious, which has to do with memory and representation, and that's anchored into the body, but that anchoring is getting further away from it than I want to go. So I would put the conscious and unconscious as, you can draw lines anywhere you want.
Well, let's say it's wholeness. Self is wholeness in the context of, I've lost track of whether it's Buddhism or Jungian psychology, honestly. But it's everything, and it's what we're missing when we think that the world is just the ego. When we aren't understanding that there's something deeper there that we can draw from. Then we're missing our wholeness. And so we're missing our self. And so it's like like who's looking through the microscope, except that the microscope, the instrument we're looking through, is the psyche. And if we're knowledgeable about these things, then we can see the whole picture. But right?
Yeah, but I could look to the microscope. See, a consensus developed, and there was a focus. Somebody said, we're looking at this stuff. But I mean, as a kid, I could have looked in and said, look, there's nothing but little green men. And these little green men work around and run around in these patterns, and so that would make sense. And it would,
Well, that was wholeness at that time for you, probably. I mean, but remember when you're talking about force, remember that page 30 of Harding's book, which I gave you earlier on, where she's talking about in Buddhism, there's this cause and effect. The first phase is cause and effect, which sounds a bit like what you're talking about, the force coming through. Okay, and so there is cause and effect, and everybody sees cause and effect happening in the world. But then we go on a little higher level of consciousness, and now we're looking at the opposites and what causes the psychic energy that makes us do anything, and that's the juxtaposition of good and bad, good and evil, or what have you, male and female, anima and animus, and so on, which causes the psychic energy. And then there's another level beyond that, which we're trying to reach, where we can be saying from up above, kind of, okay, now I know, when something's happening to me, I can take a step back and try to look at it from the other person's point of view, or something like that.
Yeah, that's one thing. But to me, that I always get tangled up in this higher levels and stuff. But for example, you do art. I can't pronounce that guy's name, but he talks about the flow. If you're in the flow, you're so engaged in producing something, or in revealing something, or in just processing something, that there is no standing back. There's none of that. Well, anybody in the arts, I think, knows that. If you're a musician, what if you're...
Well, I mean, even this evening, that's certainly coming from me. I don't know if it's coming from anyone else, but it's certainly coming from me, where I'm talking about these things, and it's whatever I'm saying is just flowing out, and I don't know if anybody else looking at the videos it means quite the same thing. But Marie, who was here last week, mentioned that she decided to look at one of the videos I put up from before, and she said she looked at 2 minutes and then she couldn't stop looking, and
Well, Corinne and I noticed it when we look up and we go, oh my God, it's 6 hours later, or it's, when I was younger, it might be 2 days later.
right, sure. Well, and so I mean, when you're with a lover,
That too,
yeah, that too. I mean, you can
yeah.
spend hours and hours and completely lose yourself in it.
Yep. At least,
I'm really drawn to the idea of dreams and the unconscious manifesting premonitions of dark inner secrets of someone. The idea of if like the example in the book was that a man kept dreaming of walking off a cliff.
Right.
And Jung was thinking, you don't do that. Don't go hiking. Because
Yeah, don't go climbing a mountain.
Yeah, and that's how he died.
Right.
He just kind of stepped off the edge of the cliff,
Right.
So that just really kind of fascinates me.
Yeah.
That idea.
Right.
That dream, and also dreams, and yeah, I know just think.
Yeah, I mean, I've looked at that vision for, I don't know, 30 years or so, and I wonder, because it keeps coming up in various Jungian books, and I asked myself whether that was just coincidence, synchronicity, or and we haven't talked about synchronicity, but okay, I mean, obviously it was very meaningful to Dr. Jung because he did shout across the street to this man, "You shouldn't go climbing," after this man shouted his dream. And I think they were across the street from one another when they were having this exchange. And then the guy walks off the cliff and takes himself and his partner down with him. And so I'm not too sure I'm with him on that. Maybe it is. I mean, maybe I can't say it's not. I have a feeling that it's a little bit overblown in the Jungian literature generally. That particular vision.
I haven't done as much reading as you have, obviously, but it really caught my eye.
Right. Well, it is a stunning vision, but I mean, there's lots of other ones in the oeuvre, and there's lots of other ones. I think if we went around the room and just talked about things that I had a feeling something such and such was going to happen tomorrow or next.
We should tell Desiree not to go into the other person's house. Right?
Pardon?
We should tell Desiree not to go into that other
Nothing
person's
bad
house.
happens in a dream. It's just odd.
Sounds like you're looking for something.
There's, I won't go into the whole story.
Yeah.
Can I say just one real quick thing? It's just because it's bugging me, and I don't want to go into the whole discussion of it. But your description of spirit and soul,
Right.
from looking at these, and as well as I have, it's probably also fed by my own interpretation of those words. I see as opposite of what you were saying. That the spirit I see as, the soul I see as something that is not in the body and not affected by the thinking so much.
Mhm.
Whereas the spirit, it's described here as like within groups and also within individual, is learned or taught or, more. It's not this. You more described it as something that lives on beyond us, and I see the soul as what something lives on beyond us and carries the ancestors and all that. And that's what it was saying here. So I just had to throw that in there.
Okay.
Pages
Well, I think that could be also a confusion with what our religious teachings are.
No, I'm talking about in particular, like when you're talking about soul,
Right.
you were more. It sounded like you were talking about what it says on the page where spirit's written down, and then when you were talking about spirit, sounded more like you were talking about what's written down.
This is why I say I'm not convinced
And I'm like-
my interpretations are correct, but
But if you think about it, like in terms of anima and animus, you know, the man is projecting his anima because that's his weak part. The woman's projecting the animus because that's her weak part. And then if and the animus associated with spirit and animus associated with soul, you see that we could end up flipping things over because
It's
Yeah,
perception, like
yeah,
you're thinking it one way,
theoretically
I'm thinking
that-
it another way,
yeah,
and
that's right, because,
that's what,
yeah,
I'm like,
because, Dr. Jung was talking about the feminine. We haven't really talked about this much, but the feminine being very in touch with instincts and earthy types of things, whereas the masculine is the very discerning part of the psyche that divides things up and decides, well, this is self, this is soul, this is, whatever. And
you've seen that symbol where it's the three rings,
right,
and there's the center that they all
right,
share.
the overlapping center,
Yeah.
yeah, right.
And maybe that's what I would call self, just
Yeah.
to go to the next step, would be that center section.
Yeah, and so would Jean Raffa. Okay, in fact, she calls that a mandorla, which is an overlapping of two
You're
sides.
talking about wholeness and an awareness.
Right.
Like,
see, I
And
would call that the small self. Going to
No,
the fun
but-
show. And then the big self is the frame in which you've got those rings.
but
It's like it goes around the whole thing.
I was thinking that where you have all three included is what I
Oh,
meant.
okay.
But the alchemists would call that the lapis lazuli, or the gold. Okay, in other words, the alchemists were famous for trying to turn things into gold, but the gold that they were seeking was psychic gold, and the psychic gold is wholeness, and that's what's in that space of the three overlapping circles. At the center of it is when you've got all the circles, but obviously it's many more than three circles. It's potentially millions of
Especially if you
circles.
throw calculus in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's like calculus, okay, in that sense. I mean, we can all accept that if there's 300 functions in a calculus algorithm, there's still the supercomputer can still come back and find us a specific point and make a prediction. It could be wrong, but it will make a prediction. Okay, and we can't get our minds around it, but a supercomputer can work it all out and say, well, this is probably where it is. But then somebody might light off a nuclear weapon tomorrow, and then what happens to your calculus?
Remember guys bananas?
Could rewrite the algorithm.
I mean, everybody thought everything was cool before 2007, and then all of a sudden the whole financial system started to collapse, and we thought we understood everything, and we didn't. Not a clue, in fact. And so we can build things up in our minds. So in terms of soul self, and I'm open to anyone's discussion about what they are.
Yeah, that has fascinated me for a long time. I've delved into Hindu belief systems and Buddhism and some Western thought, and I guess the best way I can understand it now is that I myself believe in reincarnation just because of some memories I have that are kind of bizarre and not from this life. And so the way I see it is that there's a part of us that travels to the next life, keeps going on and on. That's one part of it. So you can call that the soul. The other part is the self, which is kind of our personality and our self that develops in the life that we're in from our experiences, and our connections with other
Right.
people who we connect with culturally, in our community and what we learn. And then I like the term Atma, which is the Hindu term for the part of us that connects to Brahma, which is God. So that connects to a higher self. So there's a soul that travels from life to life. there's a self that develops in each particular life that's different each lifetime, and then there's the aspect of us that connects to, God, and which is also connected
Spiritual.
to everything else. Yeah,
Spiritual, therefore spirit.
right. Yeah, if you want to call it the spirit part. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I gave all those quotes from different traditions about what self is.
You know what else I want to add is I like that you printed this out. I really love the movie, and it just caught my eye that her name is Lucy,
Yeah,
which is from light, from like in Latin, right?
from light,
Enlightenment.
but yeah, and it's
Yeah.
also from the name of the first human.
Oh wow, yeah, that's cool too.
Right, and well, one thing I won't be doing in this group is trying to persuade anybody to any specific philosophy. Um, and, I think that the way I think about it, I couldn't say whether, what kind of woman Alexander Solzhenitsyn would have liked in his lifetime. And I couldn't say whether he liked to paint or even liked art. But I know that something about him is with us here tonight because he's been mentioned. And so regardless of whether we call that soul self or what's the other one we're talking about? Spirit. I just get lost in all these words. So anyway, I guess the takeaway for this evening is it's not you, it's this material can be very confusing. And so it's, I've been trying to get my mind around it for years and years, and I've even read these pages again several times in the last week, and still I have trouble getting my mind around it. But if there were more people in the world that were trying to do that, we might have a better world. And I think this is what Dr. Jung had in mind also, that if people understood psychology better, then the world would work better. And, for better or for worse, people's lives would work better and the world would work better. And I believe that I do believe. Okay, there are not a lot of things that I believe absolutely, but that I do believe absolutely.
Then I won't challenge it.
Huh?
Then I won't challenge it.
No, you by all means. I
I'm
mean,
kidding.
you're kidding.
I just don't think,
You don't think what?
I don't think everybody's suited to understand things that way.
Well, that's true. They're not, and we, as we look at our fellow countrymen, regardless of which side of the election they're on this year, we, it's obvious that many of them are not suited for this, and most of them wouldn't listen. Certainly, many of them wouldn't even listen to it.
That's why I oftentimes don't think the talking cure is the end all be all of things, because there's just too many people that wouldn't fit that model. And so,
But maybe it will make a difference. I mean, that's why I'm here every week, is because, for years I said to myself, why don't the Jungians try to get this out to average people? Okay, and I've watched hundreds of Jungians. I go to meetings with one another. They all talk to one another, and but with the exception of a few exceptions, Jean Shinoda Boland, Clarissa Picola Estes, now James Hollis, and a few others, very few of the people that are professionally trained Jungians. Okay, Jean Raffa is not. I mean, she's like me. She's a education doctor, and she never went to a Jungian institute, but she writes about Jungian psychology all the time. So, with a few exceptions, mostly it's not getting out there, but it is getting out there. I mean,
But some people just aren't gonna change. I mean, they're, unless they're forced to change, they're gonna.
well, we have to start somewhere. Okay, even if it's going to
Well, if
take
I
a
were to
1,000
start
years.
somewhere, I'd start with NLP, because
Well,
that's
but
a
NL,
thinkers.
NLP is programming.
Yeah.
Okay, but I mean, programming huh?
Deprogramming maybe,
Or
Yeah.
deprogramming, and so
from negativity to, you know.
right. I mean, I'm not saying that NLP, and this is neuro-linguistic programming we're talking about, but NLP, I'm not saying it isn't beneficial. Okay, I use it all the time. I use NLP all the time in my business life, and you know, I constantly do mirroring. You know, I'm doing it right now. I'm sitting the same way you are. I don't even think about it anymore. I just do it. And so it has its value, as do all other approaches, as does hypnotism, you know, as does any other type of psychology that someone may.
Just things, pardon me, just things like off of the creative arts.
Right,
You know, they found knitting in trauma groups
right.
Yeah.
is as effective as NLP.
Sure.
That'd be traumatic if I was knitting now.
But I mean, it's the right left
Yeah.
pieces.
Right, but the creative arts do help people individually, definitely, and even Dr. Jung was making people draw, and you know he saw the benefit of it. He drew many things in the Red Book itself, and so all these things can work. This is one way. And I just think it's important myself. And since I was kvetching about the fact that the Jungians never do it, I said, okay, well, I'm going to be self-elected, as Dr. Jung said. And maybe it's one individual who pulls a meetup group and shows it. And you know, I have a friend in South Africa who, you know, has been meeting with a reading group for 15 years, but she's following this one now, and she's a professional Jungian analyst, and so if I can give an idea to others to start talking about this, maybe it'll make a change, maybe it'll make a difference, who knows.
Well, even in conversations with people who aren't familiar with Jung, concepts come through.
Sure.
Just the sheer recognition that there's something besides the rational world is a revelation to people who don't think of it that way.
That's right.
So just in a conversation,
Exactly.
this is being transmitted.
Exactly. And so, I mean, to me, it's very valuable to have interaction with all of you, because I've been sitting at home staring at a computer screen for 20 years. You know, interacting, yeah, I interact with Jean and many of the writers that have work on my website, but not face to face and not in-depth conversations. So anyway, okay, let's talk about mythology. I mean, the purpose of going through man and his symbols, and I find myself getting a little bit impatient with it, because I've read it so many times before, and I've dealt with a lot of the things in much more advanced work that Dr. Jung did. But I think in terms of having this meetup group, that we need to understand the basics of where he was coming from. And so that's why I want to do Man and His Symbols first and talk about mythology and then individuation. I'm not sure we're going to read every page of it because the fourth section is about an individual individual analysis, and I'm not sure I want to get us into therapy per se, and so if you want to read that, fine. But I think it's important to understand what they're saying about mythology. Although I rail against the use of the term myth and mythology around Jungian psychology, but it's only because in the vernacular, mythology means not now, not me, not true. And, to most people, when I say something that's a myth, then you're saying it's not real. But in the context of Jungian psychology, it's very real. And so I think we need to find another language or another way to talk about it because of the way people understand the words, unfortunately. And then individuation, obviously, to understand basically what individuation is about is very important, because that was one of the fundamental things that Dr. Jung was talking about. So let's talk about mythology, begin next week, and then we'll take a week off for Labor Day and go on with it.
Thank you, Skip.
Thank you.